I think the first thing to point out is that the Isle of Man is not leaving the European Union. We were never members of it. So I think that's a clear factor, because it confuses an awful lot of people sometimes that when they asked for, should we have a vote, we were never in it, so you can't have discussion on leaving it. So I suppose to a large extent, in terms of the facts and the issues, and ignoring the politics for now, we've not moved any further forward since the beginning of December, Roger. The Isle of Man cannot influence the cause of this debate, although clearly we're affected by it. But the UK, it's got to decide its own path, set its own foreign and trade policies, and we must prepare ourselves for the UK's departure from the EU, no matter what.
Did that withdrawal agreement contain the protections that you were seeking in all the various representations you were making?
Absolutely. Park whether you think it was a good deal for the United Kingdom. From the Isle of Man point of view, we retained customs union with the United Kingdom. We had freedom of movement of people, and we had freedom of movement of manufactured goods, agricultural goods, fisheries goods, without any tariffs. And that's exactly what we had been asking. We would like, no matter what they come up with, that was the sort of, from an Isle of Man perspective, the end game were those outcomes.
With the United Kingdom?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, obviously the customs union with the European Union would have been lost, but we've signed up to a new, up-to-date UK customs relationship in readiness should there be should Brexit go ahead.
Well, maybe we can come to that later. But effectively, would you say that all that work that you did is now in the bin?
No, well, I always thought, sadly, analysing it when I was made Chief Minister, I thought the entire 5 years of my term, a high percentage of that would be on Brexit. And there are so many variants to Brexit or no Brexit that you are going to have to do a shed load of work, of which a percentage will be absolutely wasted. But it's not until the very last moment when you find out what the outcome is, when you'll be able to analyse what area you've wasted your time. But it's incredibly important that we know what the latest thinking is. We can position the Isle of Man. We've made lots of changes so that we are as well prepared as possible, so that come what may, the island can then position itself to go forward.
With such an important issue, and a country which is world's fifth largest economy, it seems strange that its parliamentary system is now probably scrabbling around this weekend trying to get a consensus of opinion to something that we don't know what it is. I mean, it's the British people don't know what it is. The British business don't know what it is. And certainly, I presume the Isle of Man doesn't.
Well, that's right. I mean, I haven't got a crystal ball. I'd be a very incredibly wealthy person if I knew what the outcome was going to be. But I think the vote clearly showed that the public didn't have a proper view. It was 48-52%, and there are so many variants that you hear being put forward by various parties and various factions in those parties that it really is. There's no clear way yet, and I think we will maybe hear what has been put forward on Monday. I think it'll be voted on Tuesday rather than actual Monday. But if you've got the leader of the biggest opposition party saying, I'm not going to take part in those discussions until you've taken out of the equation a no-deal scenario, and then refusing to attend, then it doesn't fill me with hope that there's going to be a really good, meaningful proposal put forward to the House on Monday. But I would be delighted to be proved wrong.
But that, of course, comes over to everybody. It's not a lot to do with the European Union. It's a lot to do with personal gain and their own trying to force an election.
Well, I think Laura Koonsberg, the BBC correspondent, I thought summed it up quite well, actually, when I was listening to a report from her earlier on in the week. And the majority of people do not want a hard Brexit where you effectively crash out at the end of March or the 29th of March. However, if you go into negotiations where the other side know that you will take anything as long as it's not a no deal, then you've lost many of the key cards in your bargaining hand, and therefore, hopefully as a businessman, I couldn't agree, this is my personal views now, I couldn't agree not to have a no deal as an option, because otherwise you get a very bad deal offered to you then, which could be worse than a no deal.
I could imagine that some of the European negotiators and others getting completely fed up with this now. I mean, you hit one of them the other day, I can't remember which one, said, well, tell us what you want then.
Well, they've played a very clever game. In fact, they've kept very quiet on the whole and haven't shown their hand. They've constantly said, this is it, this is the deal, you take it or you leave. And I suppose whether it's a game of chicken, we'll find out when, if the House of Parliament can agree something that they need to go to the European Union with. We'll find out whether the European Union were playing chicken, or whether they're prepared to now change their stance, or whether this is it. That was the deal. You either take it or you leave on the 29th of March.
But running out of time.
We are indeed, though obviously there's talk about extending Article 50.
But that has to be surely on two bases, doesn't it? Either there's an election or there's a new referendum.
Well, first and foremost, you have to get the European Union to agree to an extension of Article 50, and that requires all 27 member states. But as you've just alluded to, Roger, you've got to have something meaningful to debate. If it's the same old, or you don't know what you're wanting an extension for, then I would find it unlikely that they're going to extend something unless they know exactly what is being proposed, and, more importantly, that the basic concept would get a majority vote in Westminster.
Well, we come back maybe to some of these other UK things at the moment, because on the day, 2 days after the event, and after Theresa May's vote of confidence, or no confidence as the case may be, which everybody said she'd succeeded. Mind you, 9 vote majority to win is a very tight margin.
No, it was 19.
Was it 19?
She won by a majority of 19. If the DUP had voted against her, then she would have lost by 1.
But it's a very small margin for such an important vote, isn't it?
It is, and I suppose, obviously, I always thought she was going to win the confidence vote, because you'd have then had a general election, and on the whole, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So I think there was an element of confidence that she would win this one. But I think going forward, it's whether or not a deal can be agreed upon, and the general outcome, and that's to whether another, because the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has said that he will keep on asking votes of no confidence, and you could find that 19 gets whittled down as we go through this period.
You know, when you look at, and I did watch some of the debate that was running live on the network, and you begin to realise that we criticise our Manx political system. That's the way things go. But we really actually have a very quiet way of going about things compared to that. I mean, if there was a major issue such as this, I would imagine that Tynwald might argue the devil, but all come together at the end.
Yes, well, on the whole, Tynwald members are elected, and I genuinely believe that we are there for the good of the people of the island. And yes, we all have individual views, but when it comes down to the crunch, doing what we believe is right for the island is our number one concern. And I was able to take our new EU and trade bill through Tynwald and get the vast majority to back it. There was arguments over certain elements of it, but we are now as well, we have our legislation in place so that come what may, we are as well prepared as possible, and we can react to whatever happens with as much flexibility as possible. So if business leaders come to us and say, look, there's an opportunity out there as a result of Brexit, if you tweak the legislation, we can seize that opportunity, or there's a problem coming the way of our sector, we need to move ourselves to position to avoid that problem, then we can change our legislation. It still has to get Tynwald approval, I hasten to add, so it's not the Council of Ministers and myself suddenly getting this enormous power, but we can react quickly, and that I was really grateful to Tynwald to giving us that flexibility, so that come what may, we can be as well prepared as possible.
Now, when I read quite a lot of the documents that you published, including the various full reports, although the last one now is a little way back now, it's sort of been superseded in some ways.
Well, it has. Well, what I said at the start, though, Roger, is that we haven't really moved forward, if you think about it, since December. because nothing meaningful has happened. That they've had the vote and rejected it. So it's I had the greatest compliment paid to my team that businesses who have offices in manufacturing offices and factories in the UK said they got greater support and technical advice on where Brexit was going from reading those 4 papers than anything their business, on the Isle of Man that is, than anything that they'd received in the United Kingdom.
Well, that takes me to the point, though, when you carried out these various meetings, I don't know whether the negotiation is the term that you would use, but you had meetings with all sorts of people and to discuss the Isle of Man's position and the Channel Islands position too. Where does that now take you in respect of the support for the local business here? Before you went to have any of those meetings, did you have consultations and meetings with local business?
Oh yes, Roger, and that's one of the reasons we set up the Department for Enterprise. We restructured it, so we have the agency models now where representatives from various sectors just talk to the Department for Enterprise, civil servants and politicians, who that then helps us formulate our policy. And equally with DEFRA, obviously fishing is severely impacted by this, because at this moment in time 90% of all our king scallop, queenies, crab, etc. are sold into France, Italy and Spain, and therefore if you have any delays in getting that product there, then it can go off. Or even if there's no delays but there's a tariff, then those tariffs could make it totally uncompetitive. Obviously the manufacturing side and agricultural sector are affected too, but the fishing sector is probably, as a percentage of their area, they are the most affected by this.
Now, last Friday, and it was a sold-out affair, you met and delivered a talk to the Isle of Man Chamber of Commerce about the island's preparation for Brexit. What was the thrust of that talk?
Well, I suppose it's to let people know where we are, and I think it's the key message is that we're regularly over there. We've got a really good team. I'm very proud when I'm away of the officers that we have, when we take away, when they go separately to meet their UK counterpart. We can't influence the outcome, but we can let the key politicians in Westminster know what would really concern us, what we would like the outcome to be, and we have that really good working relationship that within half a day of that meaningful vote happening, the Under-Secretary of State was on the phone to me, Robin Walker, giving me an update of obviously, the 230 majority no to the deal vote, and I'm flying out a week today to have a full day in Westminster on the following Monday, and by then we will hopefully have some sort of idea, because obviously the debate will have happened tomorrow. They'll have had a vote on Tuesday, and we'll have some idea or greater understanding, I would hope, of where the situation is going.
Has this caused a change in the relationship and approach between Westminster, the various agencies of Westminster and the Isle of Man? Because I can remember the days when it was very difficult. Manx politicians used to really get annoyed that they go down to meet with the minister and they end up by meeting some junior official.
No, I think the level of meetings with UK politicians is unprecedented. And when you've got the Under-Secretary of State for DEXU ringing you up within hours of a major vote, giving you an update of what that means and inviting you down for a talk, face-to-face talks, that's the sort of thing that's never happened before. I'm delighted. You may have many views on politically where you stand, but you cannot fault this administration on involving the Crown dependencies, and especially the Isle of Man, in talks and giving us the latest up-to-date thinking and giving us access to senior civil servants in the various key departments that are impacted by this, so that we've got the latest thinking. So the Attorney General's offices have been able to speak with their UK counterpart when drafting legislation. DEFRA have been over on numerous occasions to get the latest thinking, and the same with our
They've come here?
No, we've gone over there
right, okay.
to see them. We have had the Justice Committee. Bob Field came over, who's chair of the Justice Committee, with his committee to talk to the Isle of Man and see what was going to be of concern to us. So they've put that into a report. I gave evidence to the House of Lords on the impact of Brexit on the Isle of Man. So that's one thing where I've been really delighted that we have really good access to key politicians. And I've also spoken to key politicians in the opposition too.
one hopes then that no matter what the outcome of all this is, that line of contact will maintain, because there's some stormy waters ahead.
There is, and all we can do on the Isle of Man is ensure that we are as well prepared as possible and react as quickly as possible to whatever changes come along.
Now, when you went to the Chamber of Commerce on Friday night, I said, let me come back to the question, because I'm not certain we fully answered it.
Okay.
So the thrust of your talk, what were you telling? These are the business people of the Isle of Man. What were you telling them?
Well, I suppose, obviously, reassurance that our key elements were ensuring the freedom of movement of people, for example. We need to grow our skilled workforce on the Isle of Man. We virtually have zero unemployment, and we have lots of jobs where businesses are being successful, looking to expand. We need to attract people to fill those jobs, because if we don't fill them on the Isle of Man, those businesses will look to relocate that element of the business off island. So ensuring that there's as few hurdles as possible for bringing over the skilled workforce that they need with their business, that is one. Letting them know that we are aware of the latest thinking, making sure and advising them that we have prepared as much as possible for fuel. For example, all departments have been working on the basis that there will be a no-deal scenario for nearly a year now, and we've been planning accordingly. So giving reassurance about medicines, fuel, whether that be for your car or a wagon or central heating oil or gas, where do we stand with that? Where do we stand with medicines? Where do we stand with food? I think it's reassuring people that whilst we can't decide the outcome, we are as well prepared as could be reasonably expected of the island government.
Well, that was the talk that you gave, but that obviously would have created from such an audience quite a few questions.
It did indeed, and I was delighted to receive those questions. And we ran over time, and I think there was still about 20 plus questions that we hadn't had a chance to be asked. So I've asked the Chamber to send those questions on to the External Relations team, and we will work on the answers and give it back to all the individual people.
Yeah, but what sort of questions were you about? What was the main concern?
Well, I suppose one of the main concerns is about the treatment of EU nationals living on the Isle of Man. We have quite a few people living on the Isle of Man, and the deal is that if you're currently on the Isle of Man, you've got to have 5 years of residency. So obviously to have the rights to be a UK citizen, Isle of Man citizen. So that will be business as usual. So if there is a withdrawal period, then, and it goes ahead, say it's a hard Brexit and it's on the 29th of March, then as long as you and your family are resident from the 29th of March, you will still have to comply with the 5-year residency rule, but you will be able to stay on the Isle of Man. You won't be impacted by that. So that's a key element.
But Laurie Hooper is asking about reassuring EU workers in the Isle of Man ahead of Brexit at the next sitting. EU nationals in the Isle of Man is one thing, but you're talking about recruiting staff and you're talking about skills. But if you look these days to a lot of these companies, especially, for instance, in the UK at the moment, a lot of the very senior skilled people, whether it's accountancy or whatever it may be, are actually from outside the UK. They're from the EU.
They are from the EU or further afield. And as I say, one of the main thrust was that reassurances that we've tried to give is that any EU or EEA nationals and their family members who by the 31st of December 2020 have had continuous residency here for 5 years will be eligible for the settlement status. Any members who arrive by the 31st of December 2020 but won't have been obviously continuously resident for 5 years will be eligible for a pre-settlement status, and that grants them leave to remain until they reach the 5-year threshold, and then they can therefore remain indefinite leave to remain. So we've got a settlement scheme application process. It's going to be simple and streamlined. We will be laying it, well, that's part of my answer, so maybe I shouldn't say too much because it's unfair to give part of your answer to a question. But it's all been planned, and that is reassurance for all EU nationals living on the Isle of Man.
Have any idea how many of them there are?
There are several thousand people living on the Isle of Man. I think it's 4,000 off the top of my head.
They're EU nationals?
Yeah.
And I presume some of them have been expressing concerns.
Well, they have, and we have reassured them. We have our immigration department has very good links with the United Kingdom. But as I say, if they're already living on the Isle of Man, then they will be absolutely fine. As long as they've been on the Isle of Man, as I've said before, from before the 31st of December 2020, then their rights to remain will be guaranteed. Obviously, they'll have to register, but...
What else was of concern?
Well, I suppose one of the questions is one that's asked on a relatively frequent basis, and that's relationship with Ireland. And some people seem to think, well, we just ditch the UK, become a dependency of the Ireland, Southern Ireland, and people from the European Union can come into the Isle of Man through Ireland, and they won't be affected. But that's not the case. First and foremost, Ireland is the European Union. It's not a separate member of the European Union, and therefore has to follow all the rules and regulations. So whilst we have the common travel agreement, which means that people from Ireland can move freely into the Isle of Man and the UK, that's only for Irish nationals, not for European Union residents coming through Ireland to come through the Isle of Man and the UK. So that's one element that is. The other element is that if your main trading partner is the UK for 80+% of all the trade you do, you're not going to ditch the United Kingdom and go off and join Ireland, because A, you would have to get the European Union agreement in the first place. B, you would have to take the euro. C, they probably wouldn't allow us access. Well, they would not allow us to join in our current form, because we're not a sovereign nation. We are a crown dependency, and that wouldn't allow us to join. So I think explaining that was one of the questions that I was delighted I was asked, so I was able to explain clearly why that couldn't happen.
Well, you've been announcing as well a Brexit support for Manx business. What will that entail?
Well, I was delighted that Minister Skelly's come up with a policy whereby businesses, if they want to take advice on what Brexit will mean for their business, can get a grant towards the cost of that to enable them to do in-depth analysis, for their own businesses. So that's something. And obviously, we have our external relations team. There have been 100+ technical notices issued by the UK government on what a no-deal scenario will look like, from your driving licence, going on holiday, taking a dog on holiday, taking a horse away, just to name but a few. Now, some of those technical notices have no relationship whatsoever no bearing on the Isle of Man, but some of them do, and we've put a slant on how that will impact residents of the Isle of Man, and we've published them all on our website. So there's an awful lot of information and help from the government to help individuals and businesses.
And what is the EU advisory group?
The European Union advisory? You mean on the Isle of Man? Or
on the Isle of Man, yeah.
Well, obviously, we've got the external relations team on the Isle of Man. We've got officers from the relevant departments. So you'll have DEFRA, which obviously I've mentioned earlier is severely impacted by fishing and agriculture. You've got the legislative side of things. You've got external relations, which include, and then in the Cabinet Office that comes under, you've got immigration, for example. That's covered in the same department. And then you've got the Department for Enterprise representatives, where they will be giving input onto the business views and concerns of what Brexit will mean. But as I said, at this moment in time, it's all, you could argue, hypothetical, because we do not know what it's going to be out there. But it's really important that we maintain good relationships with the United Kingdom, so we know the latest thinking, so that whatever is going to happen when it happens, we can respond accordingly and make the best out of whatever it is for the Isle of Man.
Now, a name that seems to have appeared quite recently on the scene is the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council. Now, the Isle of Man, it's said, is become part of this. Now, what does it do?
Right, well, Lord Jonathan Marland is the chair of this. He used to be the Conservative Treasurer at one stage. And effectively, it's something I was really keen that we joined, because whilst we can't, as a Crown dependency, be a member of the Commonwealth in our own right, we were able to join this organisation, and that gives us access to the 58 countries of the Commonwealth when it comes to a business point of view. So should there be a hard Brexit and we go down to WTO rules and regulations, then the Isle of Man will be able to have an input into relationships, and we will be able to help some of our businesses on the island if they're looking to do deals with some of these countries. We now have a foot in the door to enable them to speak to the key people to help those deals go ahead.
As a final point before we go to our break, the collaboration of the Crown dependencies. Now, it's not unknown for the Crown dependencies to work together on a common issue before, but this was a major one. I mean, everybody virtually had the same issues, I would have thought, and the same priorities. I mean, how well did that cooperation work?
Well, we've always had a good work. Obviously, Ian Gorster's no longer the Chief Minister of Jersey, for example, but he is still the person who deals with the external relationships for Jersey. So I have a good working relationship with him. Gavin, Chief Minister of Guernsey, again, the three of us have worked well for the interest of the three Crown dependencies.
How effective would you say it was?
Well, it's been very effective. It's not just Brexit. We have other issues. The EU Code of Conduct Group, for example, we've worked closely with to ensure that we have a joint message going forward. So the Isle of Man, you could argue, is probably slightly better positioned than the Channel Islands to the extent that they are really close physically to the European Union, and they've got a plethora of problems, especially with fishing, where they're even going to land their catch, etc., and the lot of their financial products that go into France, etc. So they probably have slightly different concerns than ourselves. Where we are incredibly fortunate is that I think in 1993, I can't take any credit for this, our politicians at the time agreed to sign up to World Trade Organization rules as a member through the United Kingdom. Jersey and Guernsey didn't at the time, and now have a really hard job of trying to bring their legislation up to date so that they can comply with WTO rules and regulations, but also get acceptance that they can become members through the United Kingdom, whereas we already have that. So if there's a hard Brexit, then we are in a much better position than they are till they are able to get their membership completed.